In early 2026, the city of Minneapolis found itself at the absolute center of a tense, chaotic showdown between federal power and local communities. A massive immigration enforcement operation came to town, and it led to protests, lawsuits, and a huge constitutional standoff. But to really get how it all reached a boiling point, we've got to look at what happened first, not on the streets, but deep inside the halls of power.
See, this whole story doesn't really kick off in Minnesota. It starts right here, inside the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., where a sudden, pretty shocking act of protest by its own staff sent some serious shockwaves through the government.
And we're not talking about junior staff members here. These were leaders in the Civil Rights Division, the very part of the DOJ that's supposed to investigate wrongdoing by law enforcement. They were walking away from the kind of jobs that are the pinnacle of a legal career. So you have to ask, what could possibly be so serious that 4 seasoned federal prosecutors would just quit their jobs in protest? Well, the answer is tied to a single, fatal encounter, hundreds of miles away, that brought this whole simmering conflict to a full-on boil. The spark that lit this whole fire? It was a single traffic stop that went horribly wrong and quickly became a national flashpoint. Her name was Renee Good. She was a 37-year-old American citizen, a mother of 3, and she was shot 3 times in the face by an ICE agent. She had literally just dropped her 6-year-old son off at school. And right away, 2 completely different stories pop up. The administration's official line was that Good was a dangerous domestic terrorist. But then, video evidence surfaced that seemed to tell a totally different story. It looked like she was actually trying to get other cars to pass safely before she tried to leave the scene. Local officials were immediately skeptical. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, basically said, look, they've already decided what happened here before any real investigation has even started. They've already labeled the victim. And this is what brings us right back to those resignations. The DOJ's leadership refused to open a standard civil rights investigation into the shooting. And for those career prosecutors, that was a line they just wouldn't cross. So they walked out. But here's the thing. The shooting of Renee Good wasn't just some isolated incident. Not at all. It was part of something much, much bigger. A massive federal operation that had brought thousands of agents into Minnesota in the first place. It was called Operation Metro Surge, and this wasn't just some local enforcement action. DHS themselves called it the largest immigration operation in the history of the United States. Think about that for a second. An unprecedented deployment of federal force right into a major American city. And just look at how quickly things spiraled out of control. The operation kicks off in December. Then, January 6th, DHS announces this huge escalation. The very next day, Renee Good is killed. A week later, another shooting. And 10 days after that, a 3rd person is shot and killed. This all happened in the span of just a few weeks. The tactics being reported on the ground were creating a real climate of fear. We're talking about U.S. citizens being wrongfully detained, raids on major stores like Target, confrontations with students outside high schools, and agents forcing their way into people's homes. The operation was clearly going way beyond just targeting specific individuals. So, faced with this new reality, the people of Minneapolis and their elected leaders, they didn't just sit back and take it. The response was swift, it was massive, and it was incredibly unified. 50,000. That's the estimated number of people who took part in a statewide general strike. I mean, can you imagine that? Tens of thousands of people marching in freezing temperatures, while hundreds of businesses and even cultural institutions shut their doors in solidarity. It's incredible. And the state's attorney general, Keith Ellison, he did not mince words. He called it a federal invasion that was making his state less safe. That really shows you the complete breakdown of trust that was happening between local and federal authorities. So while all these protests were happening in the streets, an equally intense battle was being fought in the courtroom. And that's where this whole thing escalated into a major legal and constitutional crisis. It was really a full-scale legal assault. You had the state and the cities suing DHS directly, then the ACLU filed class action suits, and on top of all that, hundreds of individuals who said they've been wrongfully detained filed their own lawsuits. It was a total legal mess for the federal government. And the administration's response? Well, they went on the offensive. In a highly unusual move, the DOJ started issuing subpoenas to Minnesota's governor and local mayors, basically launching an investigation into the very officials who were challenging their authority. And then came the ultimate threat. President Trump actually floated the idea of invoking the Insurrection Act. That's a move that would let him deploy active-duty military troops onto American streets, even if the state government was against it. The standoff had absolutely reached its boiling point. So with all this chaos playing out, it really makes you wonder, what are these agents actually taught? What does their training say about using force, especially lethal force? Well, an investigation by Al Jazeera actually managed to get a hold of some internal ICE training documents. And what those documents reveal about the agency's whole approach to using deadly force is pretty eye-opening.
Okay, check this out. This is a direct quote from a training quiz. Trainees are asked what actions they must take from the use of force continuum, you know, that scale from verbal commands to physical force, before using deadly force. The correct answer on the quiz? None. Deadly force can be initiated immediately.
And it goes even deeper. The training materials explicitly label the idea that deadly force can only be used as a last resort as a myth. A myth. Instead, they teach agents that the law requires objectively reasonable force, not necessarily minimal force. They even argue that trying to de-escalate could create unnecessary risk for the officer. Which really brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of this entire crisis. In a situation like Operation Metro Surge, where you have federal agents operating with this kind of training and authority, clashing directly with local governments, who is ultimately responsible for protecting the public?